While on a technical level, Spider-Man 2 is a fantastic game, I think the story leaves a lot to be desired. I played through the whole story. I've played through almost the whole game. I'm about 2 achievements away from getting 100% on it. But the story, the main campaign just didn't do it for me. I have a lot of small issues with it, but I think that the main story has one big problem above all else, and it is the age-old tale of a passive versus an active main character. Can you keep it down, please? Sorry. The difference between a passive character and an active one means that a passive main character does not make decisions that affect the plot, that move the plot forward, whereas an active character makes decisions that do move the story forward. Case in point, in the movie Spider-Man 2, Peter chooses to stop being Spider-Man halfway through the movie, which directly affects the plot, and it directly affects the rest of the movie and how it plays out, because he chose to do this. It would not make sense if Peter all of a sudden stopped being Spider-Man, because he wouldn't have chosen to do that. Now, you could make an argument that his powers were fading, but it was because of how he was choosing to live his life. See what I'm saying? An active main character makes decisions that move the plot forward. In the game Spider-Man 2 for the PS5, Peter Parker is a very passive character. Throughout this game, he is constantly the one being dragged into other things, or other people are making decisions for him. As I played through the main story of Spider-Man 2, I was very disappointed and underwhelmed. The story leaves a lot to be desired. And while there is certainly an argument to be made that I'm personally just not a fan of the symbiote story, or Venom, I personally find it to be very boring. I don't think that's the main problem here. The problem is that Peter Parker does not choose to make these decisions for himself. The very first one happens at the very beginning of the game, where Peter is teaching a class and Miles goes outside, Miles finds Sandman, Miles pulls Peter out of class, Miles is the one who convinces him to go and fight Sandman. Now, you could say that Peter doesn't really try to put up a fight, he's not really arguing, but he knows he has to do it. It's a small thing, it's not the worst decision that they've made in this game. It's not the worst part of this game by any means, but it is the first example of it. It's in the very first scene. Later on, as the story continues, Peter fights Kraven, and he's stabbed with a knife and killed by Kraven when Harry decides to give him the symbiote. Now, I will say that in most symbiote stories, Peter does not choose to take on the symbiote himself. It grafts itself to him. Usually the symbiote chooses Peter. And that's fine, because we know that as Peter Parker, being who he is, he would never choose this kind of power, because he already has great power. But as the story continues and the symbiote plot advances, Peter chooses to do very little. The only thing that the writers of this story choose to do with the symbiote is to have him be mean and be a dick and be rude, which is literally the basic requirement for a symbiote story. And it never really goes anywhere. It just continues on with that. They have other Miles stuff going on. You know, they have his story and his whole thing with Martin Lee. But as the story continues, Peter just continues to be rude and be a dick and, mouth off to people. And I expected that even when I did missions that weren't attached to the main story, if I had the symbiote at that point in the story, that Peter would go into side missions or go into crime fighting scenarios and act like a symbiote. And he does act like that in crime. If you go and stop random crimes, he's going to say, kind of edgy lines or whatever and be extra mean. But if you do side missions, like, for instance, in my case, if you do the flame quests, Peter's still going to act like regular Peter. He's still going to say, you shouldn't kill people. You shouldn't do this. You shouldn't do that. Whereas if he has the symbiote, I would think he would be encouraging this. And even Wraith would be like, wait, whoa, why are you advocating for me to kill these people? Like, I want to, but I figured you'd be against that. Something like that would be very interesting, where if you choose to do these missions while you have the symbiote or without, they play out differently. But that's the problem here. The game doesn't try to do anything like that. It's very simple. It's very bare bones symbiote story. And it ends, the way that the symbiote Spider-Man plot ends is that he goes to fight Kraven, and then Miles interrupts, and Miles is the one who pulls Peter out of the symbiote. But in doing this, you remove the most important part of the symbiote story, where Peter has to choose to remove himself from the symbiote, where Peter has to choose to rip it off of him and become his former self again. The most iconic part of a symbiote story is when Peter rips it off. And while, yes, you could say they're trying to do something different, they're using the Miles plotline, they're using the fact that they have Miles and Spider-Man in this game to do this. On paper, I'm fine with that. I don't think that that'd be an issue. My problem is that, once again, someone else is making this decision for Peter. He never, at any point, recognized how bad the symbiote was. You never got to have a moment where Peter did something that snaps him out of this state. Ironically enough, Spider-Man 3, the movie, does this far better than they do it here. Because you have all of that, you have all the iconic moments of symbiote Peter in that movie with, the dancing and, fucking now dig on this and all this stuff. But you also know that he's being a terrible person. He's, he took Gwen Stacy to the place where MJ works so that he could show her off and try and prove something to MJ, and then he rips the spotlight from her when she's doing the only thing she cares about doing, and then he takes it for himself, and then he patronizes her, and then he starts a fight, and then he hits her.
Who are you?
I don't know.
And that snaps us and Peter out of that moment of, whoa, 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 Peter would never do this. This is not Peter Parker. This is someone else, which is the best part of a symbiote story, because you get this moment where you're all of a sudden snapped out of this state that you were just in. And all of a sudden, Peter can see what kind of person he's become, what kind of person he's been acting like. And you can't have the iconic bell tower moment, the iconic shot in the rain, without him hitting MJ. And you also can't have Peter ripping off the suit without that moment. So since they don't have that here, they have to have Miles rip it off of him. And it feels empty because Peter didn't choose to do this. Miles did. Miles saw it and he pulled him out of it. But again, for Peter, this is nothing. This is Peter given the symbiote, acting like the symbiote, and then someone else ripping him out of the symbiote. Peter did nothing. You could make an argument that I guess the moment where Peter has to snap himself out of it is when he chases MJ or attacks MJ. I don't know how you want to phrase that, but that moment in the tunnel. But the problem with that is Peter isn't doing that. The symbiote is, because Peter is asleep. We established this at the beginning of the sequence, that Peter is not awake for this. The symbiote is. So the symbiote is the one doing this to MJ, not Peter. You can't have that moment where Peter smacks MJ in Spider-Man 3 wouldn't work if Peter was asleep. Another prime example, another good example of a symbiote story with a snap in it, is from The Spectacular Spider-Man, the TV show. One of the best adapted symbiote stories, and I think the best moment in that is when there's a plotline where Aunt May is in the hospital. And Peter doesn't go to see her, even though Aunt May, the one person he cares about the most in this world, is in the hospital. She's wounded or sick, I forget why she's in the hospital, but Peter doesn't go to see her. And then once he finally does, Eddie Brock is there. Eddie Brock went to go see Aunt May before Peter did. And that's your one moment as an audience of like, oh, whoa, wait a minute.
Don't push me, Eugene. I'm not in the mood.
Yeah, your aunt's sick. Poor puny Parker. Even Sally feels bad for you. But not me. If you're hanging up on the she-geek, that proves you're still a stuck-up egghead. A guy who can't even see when his friends are trying to help.
Okay, if Flash Thompson's making sense, something must be seriously wrong.
It's a good snap-out moment of like, what have I been doing? Where my priorities are way out of whack. And I think that with this Peter's asleep plot in this game, I think they're trying to harken off of one of the best parts of the symbiote plotline in the Spectacular Spider-Man, where you have a whole episode where Peter is asleep. And the symbiote goes out and fights the Sinister Six and doesn't say anything. And people are like, why is Spider-Man not saying any words? Why is he so quiet? And he's coming close to killing them. And we all know it's because Peter's asleep. It's mostly an episode to show the true power of the symbiote, that it can just puppet Peter's body without his control. But again, you can't have that moment at the hospital if Peter is asleep. Which is why you can't have that moment in this game with MJ, because Peter is asleep. He's not making these decisions. this symbiote is. I think that the solution to this problem is we already have a fight with Miles and Peter. We already have a moment right before Peter gets the symbiote taken that could work. And I think there is also a way to utilize the fact that Miles is also Spider-Man. Utilize the two Spider-Man nature of this game. And I think that a way to do that is to have the Peter and Miles fight end with Peter almost killing Miles. Have him lose control and have the symbiote take full control of Peter, or mostly full control, and have him seriously wound Miles to the point where he's on death's door. I think that this is a moment that the player and Peter can recognize is a good snap. It's a good moment of realization. I think that in this moment of weakness, you can have Miles utilize this and fully rip Peter out of the symbiote. And it still has a good moment where Peter realizes what he's been doing. And then Peter realizes what he's been doing and what he's become that Miles uses to pull him out. I think it's a much better way than just having Miles do it all by himself, and a good way to fulfill both Miles and Peter's role in this story. All of this carries into the final part of the game. We get to this point where Miles has to reach the climax of his plotline with Martin Lee. And for the most part, I did like that Martin Lee plotline and that Miles and Martin Lee plotline. I did like it. It was a little derivative of the Freya and Kratos plot from God of War Ragnarok, where it's, I can't forgive you, but I can't hate you, sort of a thing. You know, it's not the best version I've ever seen of that kind of story, but it worked. I still think it was better than the Peter plot. But it ends in this point where they have to go into Peter's head and save him again. Peter can't save himself. It has to be Miles, which all ends with them giving Peter antivenom. But again, Peter didn't choose to do this. Peter never made this decision. Martin Lee and Miles gave him the antivenom suit. Just like Harry gave him the symbiote, just like Miles ripped him out of the symbiote, just like Miles dragged him to fight Sandman. All of these very big plot points in the game are not Peter's decision. They are someone else making these decisions for him. So he doesn't feel like a main active character because he's not. He's not driving the plot forward. Miles is. And while you could say that, yes, that makes sense because Miles is a main character, sure, there's an argument to be made there, but the problem is there's two main characters. They're both on the box, Miles and Peter. But Miles is the only one that makes decisions in this game. Even when you get to the ending of the game and they have to make the plan, Peter doesn't make the plan himself. He makes it with MJ and Miles. And again, they have a team thing going, so I don't have a problem with that inherently, but it's just an opportunity where they could have given Peter something to do. They could have given Peter something to contribute, make a decision that affects the plot. His biggest moments in his story are not his decisions. They're someone else's. So that's my main problem with this game, is it's lackluster and it feels like a first draft. It feels like they laid out all of their basic plot points that they want. They want to know where they want to go at what part, but they forgot to give any character depth. They forgot to give any, there's a lot of emotion, but it doesn't hit because they don't do any work to build to that emotion. The difference in this game with Harry and Doc Ock from the first game is that we spent a lot of time with Otto, and we knew who he was before he had the tentacles, before he had the brain implant. We got to figure out who Otto Octavius was before he became Doc Ock. We never get that with Harry in this game. They try to do it, but the problem is Harry has the symbiote from the very beginning, so we don't really know who he is. They have the flashback in the high school, but that's not really enough. That's one scene, and most of it is spent with Peter by himself. So it doesn't do any of the work to try and build to the payoff that it wants. It feels half-baked. It feels rushed. It feels like they weren't really trying. And that's very disappointing because I loved the first game. The problem is they want to have it again, but they're not doing any of the work to get there. So I know that was kind of a downtrodden part of the video, but that's kind of just how I feel. The game didn't really live up to my expectations. It didn't do what I wanted it to do. On a gameplay level, it did a lot of what I wanted it to do. I got web wings. I got most of the suits that I wanted. The combat was pretty fun still. I wish there was more web gadgets from the first game, but They had to get symbiote stuff in there, so I get that. The only gameplay thing I didn't like was that when you finish the game, there is no way to change the time of day or the weather, like there has been in the other games. It felt very out of place, it felt very odd, and you're just stuck in this boring, flat, midday lighting, and it does not encourage me to keep playing the game after I've beaten the story, because it's not, the web swinging and stuff kind of gets old after a while, and it breathed life into playing the game more when you could change the time of day and change your environment around you. So that was pretty disappointing, but ultimately it's just hard. It's going to be hard for me to replay this game. I replayed the first game 5 times. I don't think I'll get anywhere near that with this game, just because the main story doesn't do a lot for me. There was a few highlights. I liked the fight with Symbiote Peter and Kraven. I liked the Scream fight. I think both of those boss fights were way better than the final battle with Venom. That one felt very anticlimactic and boring. But yeah, the game was just... I was disappointed most of the time with the story. It felt like they weren't really trying. It felt rushed. And I just had to talk about it because, again, I love the first game. And I've like I said, I've played through the main story 5 times, and I think I've cried maybe 3 out of 5 times with that last scene with Doc Ock. It just...
You are everything I wanted to be! You just threw it away!
It just hits me, man. And I didn't get that with this game. I didn't get anywhere near that. The only time I got really emotional at this game was when Howard died. Because I knew Howard from the other games, and I liked his missions, and I liked him for who he was as a character. So yeah, I mean, the game, it takes a lot of swings, and I think it misses more often than it hits. Yeah, I'm interested to see where it goes next, but my hopes for the third game have kind of been quelled a little bit, because if they continue to do what they've done here, I don't think I'm going to like it. I think they need to really, really focus on their storytelling again, like they did with the first game. I think they've got the swinging dialed in as much as they can get it. I'm sure they're going to expand on it further, but I'd really like to see them focus on the story more. I think that's going to be the thing that drives these games, is fueling them and making them playable. And I know they can, because a lot of the side missions are very well written. That Mysterio one is great. The Flame one is very good. The side missions are, in my opinion, far better than the main story. That's obviously not the way it should be, and that's not the way I want it to be. So I hope that going forward they can improve upon the mistakes that they made here and make a really good killer third game. I'm sure it's going to be the last one in the series, but yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I'm not looking forward to it as much as I probably would have, but I'm interested to see where they go with it. I'm still a fan of the series. This one didn't really do it for me. I don't think it's anywhere near a masterpiece. It takes a lot of swings, and it misses more often than it hits. So that's what I have to say. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe. That would be nice. You don't have to, but you could consider it. You might just consider it. Just think about it. You can do it if you want to. Dude, seriously, keep it down.